Hello, and welcome back to Watching Washington. I'm John Henry Henson.
And I'm Ellie Akra. We're back today with national and global news from your capital. Student eyes are on Washington this week as Supreme Court hears an argument surrounding President Biden's student debt relief program. CNN correspondent Reed Binion has the story.
Today is a great day to cancel student debt.
High stakes at the high court as the Supreme Court hears arguments in two cases impacting millions of Americans. On Tuesday, justices considered whether President Biden's plan to erase student debt is constitutional.
Some of the finest moments in the court's history were pushing back against presidential assertions of emergency power.
Conservative justices also pointing to the price tag of the loan forgiveness program, an estimated $400 billion over time, according to the Congressional Budget Office, and questioning whether the program is fair.
But I think they argue that is missing is cost to other persons in terms of fairness, for example, people who've paid their loans, people who don't have planned their lives around not seeking loans, and people who are not eligible for loans.
Some liberal justices also weighing in on what may be fair.
I'm wondering whether or not the same fairness issue would arise with respect to any federal benefit programs.
One of the cases is a challenge from 6 GOP-led states wanting to block Biden's executive actions. The second involves 2 individual borrowers suing because they are not qualified for full debt relief. The Biden administration argued Congress gave it the power to forgive student loans because of financial hardships Americans face due to a national emergency, the COVID pandemic. An estimated 40 million people qualify for the program, which can forgive up to $20,000 per borrower.
Former Purdue president Mitch Daniels believes that student loan forgiveness would be a bad idea, calling it a gift to the wealthy and suggesting the government hold people more accountable for student debt, rather than forgive the debts in what he called a pillaging of the taxpayer. You can hear what students had to say about the Supreme Court case over on Fast Track News.
Across 32 states, millions of families are seeing a major loss in their food stamp benefits. During the COVID pandemic, lawmakers introduced an increase in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or commonly known as SNAP. These benefits are for low-income families to battle the high food insecurity rates. This increase was instrumental in making sure families stayed afloat during the pandemic, but recently ended on Wednesday of this week. According to CNN, SNAP-reliant households will see a loss of at least $95, with some states averaging a loss of $200 across households. Experts are not yet sure of what will come from these changes, but are expecting to see an increase in food insecurity across the United States.
Last weekend, senior officials from the U.S., Jordan, Egypt, Israel, and Palestine met in Aqaba, Jordan. Out of this meeting came an agreement between Israel and Palestine to de-escalate and increase coordination, following a string of violence from both sides in recent weeks. The meeting reaffirmed the two sides' commitment to previous agreements and their work towards a, quote, just and lasting peace. U.S. Senate Democrats also visited the Middle East last week, urging Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to stop expansion efforts in the West Bank. Despite the Aqaba agreement, violence continued among Israelis and Palestinians Tuesday. A follow-up of the meeting is planned for next month in Egypt.
Late Tuesday night in Greece, a passenger train carrying more than 350 people collided head-on with a freight train near the city of Larissa. According to CNN, as of early Friday morning, at least 57 people were killed in the crash, with dozens more injured. In a statement Wednesday, Greece's prime minister said the crash was caused by tragic human error. A station manager in Larissa was arrested, and he has been charged with mass deaths through negligence and causing grievous bodily harm through negligence. Additionally, the Greek transport minister resigned after the crash. The crash raised questions about Greece's poor track record with railway safety, and an official echoed this by saying the railway system was, quote, not up to 21st century standards.
This week, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot lost her bid for the re-election for the upcoming race. Lightfoot was the first Black woman and openly gay mayor of Chicago. Making history in a different kind of way, Lightfoot is the first incumbent candidate to lose re-election since the 1983 mayoral race and the first to not make the runoff since 1999. In her concession speech, Lightfoot commented, quote, "Obviously, we didn't win the election today, but I stand here with my head held high and a heart full of gratitude." The race for mayor now stands between former CEO of Chicago Public Schools, Paul Vallas, and Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson.
This past Tuesday, Republicans and Democrats questioned top Pentagon officials over Ukraine military spending. According to the New York Times, members of the House Armed Services Committee grilled DoD members, citing concerns about funding transparency and inefficient spending. Pentagon officials, on the other hand, testify that all funds are being properly allocated.
So, Mr. Stork, I would like to start with you as a Department of Defense Inspector General. In all your inspections and oversight, in country and out, have you found any instances of sensitive weapons like Stinger missiles being either lost or diverted to those not authorized to have them?
Thank you very much for the question. I'm obviously not at liberty to talk about any investigations, but we have not substantiated any such instances, no, sir.
So you can confidently say that to your knowledge, every sensitive weapon is currently under control of those who should have them.
Well, thank you very much for the question. That's why we're engaged in we're laser focused on this issue.
Numerous representatives from both sides of the aisle fear a growing divide over an issue that has been bipartisan since the start of the war. With President Zelensky requesting even more advanced weaponry, like the coveted F-16 fighter jets, questions over misuse could hamper funding in the future.
On this Tuesday, President Joe Biden nominated Julie Su, the current Deputy Labor Secretary, to serve as the next Labor Secretary of the United States. The nomination comes in the wake of current Secretary Martin J. Walsh's announcement that he will be stepping down from his position in March to run for mayor of Boston. If confirmed by the Senate, Su will become the first Asian American woman to hold the position of U.S. Labor Secretary. Her nomination has been welcomed by labor groups and worker advocacy groups who say she is the right person to lead the Department of Labor at a time when workers are facing unprecedented challenges due to the COVID-19 pandemic and other economic factors.
President Biden said he will not veto the Republican-backed D.C. crime law bill that has sparked controversy in Washington. This comes as Congress voted last month to pass a resolution that would block revisions to the D.C. Criminal Code. The D.C. City Council is not happy with Congress, as they feel it is their right to choose the laws for Washington, D.C. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser opposed the changes that were made by the City Council, but her veto was overridden. President Biden stated that he also was not happy with some of the changes and said that if the Senate votes to overturn what D.C. did, he would sign it.
Disney World's autonomy in Florida comes to an end as Governor Ron DeSantis signs a bill that will return the special district back to state control. The 25,000-acre district, known as Reedy Creek Improvement District, has been occupied by Disney since the 1960s. This has granted Disney a special tax status and was a major part of why the mega employer chose to settle in Florida. According to NPR, DeSantis stated that this status is no longer fair and has been allowing Disney to avoid local regulations.
The corporate kingdom finally comes to an end. There's a new sheriff in town, and accountability will be the order of the day.
Although DeSantis has said his actions are in support of Florida citizens, some believe that his bill is an act of retaliation against the media conglomerate. This belief stems from former Disney CEO Bob Chapek standing against DeSantis' Don't Say Gay bill, which limited discussions about sexuality and gender identity in classrooms.
Coming up after the break, one company made a massive announcement regarding out-of-pocket insulin costs.
Are you looking for a new hobby? Or you want to have a fun evening with your friends?
Then come climb to new heights at the Co-Rec Climbing Wall.
In light of the East Palestine, Ohio train derailment, the CEO of Norfolk Southern, Alan Shaw, is set to willingly testify before the Senate. On February 3rd, Norfolk Southern's train cars were derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, while carrying hazardous materials in what many politicians are calling a, quote, preventable incident. This disaster has caused a number of issues, including toxic water and air in surrounding areas, even causing healthcare workers to see a spike in what they are calling, quote, chemical bronchitis.
Norfolk Southern CEO Alan Shaw needs to come before the Senate, answer questions under oath, and explain to the American people exactly what went wrong and how they will prevent accidents like this from happening. He should not duck. He should be there. He should come before the Senate. And we are asking Mr. Shaw to do just that.
According to ABC News, Schumer also stressed the importance of finding out why Norfolk Southern thought it was a good idea to spend years lobbying to loosen regulations designed to prevent accidents like this. Overall, the Senate hopes to engage in productive conversations regarding industry-wide issues, as well as what Shaw knows about the incident.
In recent weeks, TikTok has become the subject of discussion, specifically the ban of the app. A few weeks ago, our anchors reported that Biden had enacted a ban of TikTok on the devices held by government officials. Since then, according to Reuters, the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee voted to give President Biden the ability to ban the app. The Republican representative, Michael McCaul, also the chair of the committee, stated, "Anyone with TikTok downloaded on their device has given the Communist Party of China a backdoor to all their personal information." Democrats wish to delay the bill in order to consult professionals as to how TikTok may be affecting information release. As the events continue to unfold, we will report more on the TikTok ban, especially with the TikTok executive, Xiaozi Chu, set to appear before the U.S. Energy and Commerce Committee on March 23rd.
FDA advisors have recommended 2 different types of RSV vaccines from Pfizer and GSK. These are the first RSV vaccines to be recommended for approval in the world. The vaccines for patients age 60 and over. RSV is a virus that causes infection of the respiratory tract and can be extremely dangerous. According to the CDC, there are around 14,000 deaths from RSV annually, but over 150,000 hospitalizations. It will take a few months for the vaccines to be approved by the FDA. Then it will go to the CDC for their recommendation. And if it passes, they will become available to the public soon after. Indianapolis-based Eli Lilly has announced they will cut prices for some insulin products by 70% later this year. The announcement comes shortly after President Biden called for price caps during his State of the Union address, stating that all insulin costs should be capped at $35. Those with type 1 diabetes must take insulin every day to survive. Lilly's price caps will provide critical relief to citizens without insurance coverage and who have previously faced annual costs above $1,000 for insulin.
We're calling today on our partners in the insurance industry, government policymakers, employers who set the policy for their own insurance to match this new effort to reduce the cost to no more than $35 a month for insulin for all Americans.
According to Lilly CEO David Ricks, Lilly will immediately cap monthly out-of-pocket costs at $35 for people who are not covered by Medicare's prescription drug program. American Diabetes Association CEO Chuck Henderson applauds Lilly for these steps and calls for other insulin makers to cap patient costs as well.
With strong bipartisan support, a new House committee created to combat China has received strong backlash from the Chinese Communist Party. According to the Associated Press, the committee held its first meeting Tuesday, where House representatives and officials discussed the growing threats China poses to the U.S. and democracy.
Welcome, everyone, to the Select Committee's first hearing on the Chinese Communist Party's threat to America.
Chinese officials made strong statements rebuking the committee, with Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning demanding members, quote, discard their ideological bias and zero-sum Cold War mentality. As China asserts greater control in the South China Sea, increases hostility towards Taiwan, and raises surveillance questions from the U.S. over spy balloons, U.S. policymakers are feeling the heat to take action. Coming up next on Watching Washington, we have Joyce Duan interviewing a Purdue liberal arts professor about the impact of China's surveillance balloon on U.S. and China's relations.
I work for Student Life because I'm able to develop leadership skills that will carry over after college.
I work in Student Life because I'm developing time management skills and friendships that will last a lifetime.
To speak on the political fallout surrounding balloon surveillance and growing tensions between the U.S. and China, our guest this week is Dr. Sorin Matei.
Dr. Matei is Purdue's College of Liberal Arts Associate Dean of Research and expert in artificial intelligence, tech, and communication research. On the interview, we have our very own Joyce Duan. Joyce?
Thank you. That's right. So today I've got Dr. Sorin Matei, a Purdue College of Liberal Arts Associate Dean of Research and Graduate Education and Professor of Communication with me to discuss the topic of what China's surveillance balloon says about U.S. and China's relations. Thanks for being here, Dr. Sorin Matei. So my first question is, it's evident that you've contributed a lot of research to your field. Can you tell us a little bit more about your areas of expertise and research in communication and technology?
Yeah, so I'm interested in this very broad topic called human-computer interaction. Now, in the last few years, I've expanded my areas of interest to consider technology more broadly defined. So I'm interested in human technology interaction. I'm interested how humans and machines work together. I've done research related to ethics, to information, disinformation. And more recently, I got involved with a number of projects that look at military uses of technology and its interaction with human needs and strategic goals.
Applying those research on the surveillance balloons, how can balloons be potentially used for surveillance or spying efforts?
Yeah, well, balloons are not the primary means by which nations, especially great powers, keep an eye on the world. Satellite technology is the primary methodology that nations use because they are very powerful, they are very predictable, they stay up in the air of very long periods of times, and so on and so forth. However, there's a disadvantage to satellite technologies, which is the fact that satellites have eyes but no ears. They can see, but they cannot hear. What do I mean when I say they cannot hear? Well, they cannot capture the electronic information that the surveilled locations use to communicate, which can tell you a lot about the capabilities of the things you're looking at. So balloons, which fly much closer to the ground, as low as in this case was 60,000 feet, can actually capture radio waves that are being transmitted by ground installations or by planes or by other assets and form a much complete picture. Now, yet again, balloons are not very, very good at this because you cannot control their flight path. But if you put a lot of balloons in the air, each of which captures a little bit of information, you can get a pretty good picture of what's going on.
Like, what implications do this and other airborne communication devices pose to U.S. security and its airspace?
Well, this is a first and a very unusual incident. This was a first in many, many, many decades. The last time not a great power sent balloons over the territory of the U.S. was World War II, when Japan sent some balloons with incendiary bombs. And at one point, I think they also dropped or wanted to drop bats infected with disease to spread disease in the US. For the most part, balloons were not used for this type of missions. High-flying planes were used, including by the US, and that wouldn't be a novelty, but balloons were not. We were used to thinking about balloons as civilian vehicles used for weather monitoring projects. And the US put up a lot of balloons for that purpose. Typically, they would be sent up in the air from US territory and they would return to the US. And if they happened to stray, I think that those situations were squared away quite easily. Now, in this incident, we've heard the Chinese version of the story too. They keep saying that this was, in fact, just like many other meteorological balloons, a civilian mission. However, as far as we know, or as what we know tells us that the payload, the capabilities of the electronic surveillance mechanism, tools were quite different from what a typical balloon would carry.
As you said, it seemed like the surveillance technology has been used like a long time ago. And as you said, Chinese government response is like another version of story. And from a communication perspective, how do you think China's surveillance balloon affect public perception and attitudes toward the government?
Think a little bit about it, putting up a balloon that carries capabilities meant to surveil military installations. It's a very strong signal, right? Above and beyond what balloon does or doesn't do. It is a signal that, a certain great power wants to become a lot more adept at learning about your active capabilities. Now, when that happens, a lot of things start unraveling. First of all, trust. Great nations typically establish some boundaries between them, which they tend to respect because they trust that if you respect those boundaries, then you will not expect surprises. That's these boundaries are safety mechanisms, if you want, right? So if you don't have a need or an intention to do something in the future, it's better to say, this is how far I stretch, this is as far as you stretch. If there's any incident that's communicate about this, let's sort it out and all that. Yeah, sending a balloon that ultimately ended up surveilling a great swath of the U.S. territory, regardless if it was intentional or not. There's a story now that says that the balloon was launched from Hainan and was actually supposed to fly over Guam only, not about the U.S. But it was a clear, again, from what we know about the payload, a clear military mission. So when you do this kind of stuff, you are basically signaling the world and to the opposing side that you are unhappy with what they are doing and you are willing to risk a conflict, right, to learn more about the opposite side. And this is, in my view, very, very bad news for the world. This has raised the temperature of international distrust quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not good.
My next question is how do social media platforms and digital communication technologies shape public opinion and debate around surveillance balloons in China?
Yeah, well, social media users were very actively involved in this conversation, and they were involved as you would expect. There was a lot of emotional knee-jerk reactions. There are many knee-jerk reactions. In the US, many of them called for a stern response, and many people wondered why, the balloon was allowed to fly all over, it wasn't shut down. Many people wondered why this happened and all that. So obviously social media raised the temperature as well. And that did not help anybody in any way. Yet at the same time, we need to be very mindful of one very simple thing. There's no smoke without fire. If there were no balloon, there would have been no reason to raise the temperature, right? And if this were just a very simple misunderstanding, we would have had many opportunities to sort this out and calm the spirits down. However, what I read and what I saw is that did not happen. I learned that the balloon actually had some self-destruct mechanisms. Now, if China wanted to prevent any misunderstanding and all that, they could have brought the balloon down before it reached the territory of the United States. We also learned that the balloon was active while flying over the United States. And again, it's relatively simple to tell the balloon not to listen anymore, just to shut it, close its eyes and shut its ears, right? Mm-hmm. That did not happen, right? There were a lot of things that made a lot of people very suspicious, very unhappy. And this, again, did not help anybody. And here I'm not talking about social media users anymore. I'm talking about politicians in the US. I'm talking about the military in the United States, whose job is to make sure that there's no threat, explicit or implicit.
So as a professor and a scholar, what do you think, how might scholars and researchers in communication and related fields contribute to broader understanding of the social, cultural, and political implication of China, as well as other countries' use of surveillance devices in the future?
Well, there are two dimensions to this conversation. One is the political strategic conversation, right? And we need to be realistic and look at the problem the way it is. We're going through a very difficult time in international relations. There's a lot of competition verging on conflict. And actually, I really think that we are close or even past the point where, the relationship between a global West and Russia, China, and other dissatisfied regimes, right, has reached the point of overt or implicit conflict. Now, first of all, we need to, as researchers, we need to explain the sources of this conflict, and we need to provide a good and realistic explanation for why we got where we are and where we will go next if certain preconditions happen. That's one thing. At the same time, we have this other conversation that you alluded to, which is that technologies, many technologies are used nowadays for surveillance, internal and external, and they have become cheaper and more pervasive, right? Which accelerates the pace of competition and the probability of conflict. And again, we need to study, this problem, and we need to better understand, how accessible and powerful these technologies have become, and come up with some reasonable, at the very least, pieces of advice for our leaders and how to handle them. I don't have anything offhand, and I would really speculate about this. These are very important things that demand a very clear understanding, right? Such as regulating surveillance technology. It would be very easy for me to say, yeah, there should be a treaty, a law that would say this and that, but this would be a naive proposition. Countries are not easily convinced of the necessity of this. And actually, I don't really think that we could or should have an international body dealing with, very, delicate internal affairs that could create more harm than good.
Thank you, Dr. Sorin Matei, for sharing your distant perspectives and your professional information about this with us. And that's all for today's Watching Washington. And thank you for joining us. See you next time.